Sorry for waking a few of you up,
Oh,
but we're due to have a crack. I've always wanted a gavel. Right, we've had slightly longer than half an hour.
2 minutes. Oh,
Eh?
the ladies are going.
No, it was... Oh, I said 10 too. Well, how many have we got? We got a quorum?
No, you won't have.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We could quickly pass a vote to increase our wages.
You're going to have to wait, I'm sorry. You've only got 10. Start.
There's a false start. The press will note who's not bothered to come back after lunch on time.
Those of us online, can we count as quorum as well, Mr. Chair?
Well, yes, you can.
Yes.
We still don't have enough. You haven't got quite the pulling power you thought you had, but we've got enough here to have a debate. And I'm going to welcome Ben and John. Megan here is acting in the position of the Chief Executive, who's had to go off for a little while. We're doing this at the governing body, which is an unfortunate timing. I think this probably should have been at the Planning and Policy Committee, but for reasons of which not my control, it's ended up here. It's unfortunate also that it doesn't allow her kura to be present in the debate. Nevertheless, I'm not in favour of approving this private plan change, not because of anti-growth, but because this doesn't line up with our future development strategy. And Councillor Hills, this has been punted from your committee. Would you like to speak to this before the staff do? Before you start, Councillor Hills will move to reject the plan change, and I'll second that. Councillor Hills just might like to say something, saying it normally would have been before his committee, before I hand over to John, Dugan and Ben. Thank you.
Potentially best for the staff to lead off first, and then we'll go back to conversations.
John, please.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, councillors. So a brief introduction from me, then I'll hand over to Ben, and then I will talk to the strategic issues that this private plan change raises, some of which you'll be familiar with from previous private plan changes that have been to the Policy and Planning Committee, and there is one matter that's quite a little bit unique to this one. So, I'll
just note 5 women have just entered the, councillors have just entered the, we're just catching up with our diversity, thank you.
Right, back into it. So the reason we're bringing this to you today is that once we receive all the information on a private plan change request, the RMA statutory timeframe really kicks in, and we have, I think it's a 30 working day requirement. If we delayed things to the next Policy and Planning Committee, we would be well over that 30-day working requirement. We can extend that, so we're now into an extended period. We like to try and nail things within and make decisions within those statutory timeframes, so hence the reason for bringing it to you. So Ben Willis is a policy planner in our department. I think this is his first time before the governing body, so I'm going to hand over to Ben. As I said, he will explain where the plan change is, what it's seeking to do, and then I will pick up on some of the issues that we've identified. Over to you, Ben.
Kia ora. Yeah, so this private plan change is approximately 140 hectare area adjoining Warkworth. It's currently zoned future urban, mixed rural, and a very small portion of special purpose quarry zone. The area currently largely comprises of pastoral land to the north and rural lifestyle blocks to the south, with 47 landowners. Avida, the applicant, is one of those, owning 2 large lots in the north, totaling 55 hectares. Warkworth has been signalled for considerable greenfield growth in the Auckland Plan 2012, identifying it as a satellite town envisioned to grow to around 25,000 people by 2050. And this process led to 1,100 hectares of rural land directly around Warkworth being rezoned as future urban as part of the unitary plan creation process. So just jumping into what the private plan change proposes. It proposes 113 hectares of mixed housing urban zoning and 18.9 hectares of large lot zone. Included within those figures is a shift to the rural urban boundary by 29 hectares and rezoning that 29 hectares as urban zoning. A new precinct is proposed, which details walking and cycling trails, boundary treatments between the Warkworth Golf Club, which adjoins the site, and the plan change area, addresses reverse sensitivity management of the adjoining limestone quarry, requires transport upgrades, addresses management of the existing landscape overlays, and provides a transition between the urban and rural area. The plan change also maps additional SEA, significant ecological areas, alters the existing shape and extent of the quarry area buffer overlay, and applies the stormwater management area flow 1 control. The proposed rezoning will enable around 2,200 dwellings and a 210 unit retirement village. So we'll hand over to John now to talk to the issues.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ben. As identified and discussed in the comprehensive report on your agenda, this plan change does raise some strategic issues. So I'll talk through the 4 key issues that we identify and discuss in the report. Just to orient yourselves again, the map here is from Council's Future Development Strategy, and the site is in Warkworth North East here, the yellow area. It does, as Ben has mentioned, so pointing on the other side, it's in this vicinity here with the existing town in this location here, and it does spread along Matakana Road, which heads up to Omaha, Matakana, Parkery and so on, by that extra 29 hectares. So it's proposing to shift that urban boundary there and include an extra 29 hectares up to an existing golf course on Matakana Road. So first key issue is the timing relative to the future development strategy. The FDS adopted by Council last year or end of the year before, 2 years ago now, looked at these future urban areas around the region, looked at the satellite growth of Warkworth, and in discussion with Auckland Transport, Watercare and other asset providers, owners, really 2035 was seen as the earliest that this land in Warkworth North would be able to be serviced with the bulk infrastructure, and therefore the FDS, Future Development Strategy, would suggest that, well, quite clearly state that unless something significant changes, the land should not be rezoned until after 2035. In the unitary plan, we have a really important front-end chapter, the regional policy statement. That's a requirement under the RMA. We've got to have one of those. Sets the big picture direction under the unitary plan for Auckland. And there are a number of criteria for shifting the urban boundary or moving the urban boundary, which this plan change proposes to do. There are also provisions in the regional policy statement around integrating land use, rezoning, development with infrastructure, the appropriate infrastructure. So it does raise some issues in terms of whether or not it really meets the regional policy statement, particularly in terms of shifting the urban boundary and integrating with appropriate infrastructure. The next key issue is the national policy statement on highly productive land. There have been signals from statements from the government about looking at changing some of the provisions in the NPS highly productive land, but at this stage, the 29 hectares of land outside the urban boundary is technically defined as highly productive land. It currently has a rural zoning, so there are several criteria outlined in the agenda report, that all of which must be met before there can be any urban development on what is technically at this point in time highly productive land. And last but not least, but linking, I guess, back into the first point, infrastructure funding. From a wastewater point of view, the advice from Watercare is that they're very much working towards a solution for the existing constraints in Warkworth, and that once those are resolved this year, and I think in 2028 for the next phase, that will create sufficient capacity for at least the early stages of this development, if not more. So there is an existing infrastructure project underway in Warkworth that in the very near future would, according to Watercare, enable capacity for the area within the urban boundary. Watercare not confirming, or haven't confirmed at this stage, whether there would be capacity for the extra 29 hectares. That's a piece of work that, if the plan change is accepted, would need to be explored in a bit more detail, but it is another potential issue, that there may not ultimately be capacity for that extra 29 hectares that the plan change seeks. But really, one of the key issues that we've identified is that in terms of transport, the upgrade of Matakana Road, there are provisions in the plan change that speak to some upgrades, but there's quite a bit of uncertainty around the provisions that talk to that upgrade. And there's certainly no funding in the council's long-term plan or in the RLTP for that upgrade of Matakana Road along the frontage of the plan change site here, right back into the existing Warkworth town centre. So there's a high degree of uncertainty around the funding for that road. The applicant in their section 32 material supporting the plan change really deals with that through talking about the provisions in the plan, making sure that appropriate upgrades take place to Matakana Road and to other roads in the vicinity. But there is definitely an issue there in terms of funding. So the criteria that you really need to apply, or that you must apply legally at this stage, around accepting, rejecting or adopting a private plan change, you've heard these on multiple occasions. I haven't got them on the slide, I don't think. No, I haven't actually got the criteria here, but I suspect you're pretty familiar with them. The two key potential grounds for rejection of a private plan change like this would be that it's contrary to sound resource management practice, and there are some court cases around what that means. In particular, the court is saying that when you make that call at this stage to say something is contrary to sound resource management practice, you've got to be seeing something at a very coarse, high level that is very flawed and problematic, and that would be a ground for rejection. The other one would be that accepting it and the plan change ultimately going through would make the unitary plan inconsistent with Part 5 of the RMA. What that really means is that the unitary plan would become internally inconsistent. I talked about the regional policy statement, so it would be, this plan change would be making the unitary plan itself internally inconsistent, but also inconsistent with those national policy statements like highly productive land, urban development. So those would be the two potential grounds. There are certainly aspects of this plan change that would appear on a course assessment to be in line with sound practice, in line with national policy statements, but we have identified that there are a couple of grounds there relating to infrastructure, funding and financing, moving the urban boundary and development on highly productive land that are grounds that you could exercise your discretion to reject the private plan change. However, on balance, the report recommends that the plan change should be accepted. So just to explain why, on balance, we've erred towards that recommendation. It's almost inevitable that if the plan change is rejected, the applicant would appeal to the Environment Court, that high-level course assessment decision that you would make. There is case law there that talks about this high-level course assessment. And that if there is some doubt, then the case law, the courts would say we should really err on the side of caution. And the reason the courts are saying that is that matters of detail can be thrashed out in a hearing, expert evidence can be presented, other parties can make submissions, and that you can get a really thorough analysis of the issues. So it's unclear as to where the Environment Court might go, but it's always unclear, I guess, where courts might go if there's a decision that's appealed to the court. So it is on balance. It's not an absolute clear-cut, yes, there are no grounds to reject and therefore you should accept. We note that there are some challenges, some issues with this plan change that in discussions with our legal team, the grounds are open for reject, but we feel on balance that accept is the way forward. So that's it from Ben and I, and we would be more than happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Questions from Councillor Baker first.
Thanks, John. How much of the 29 hectares is, I read somewhere in the report and I was just scouring back, going to try it, there was pockets of highly productive land. Is the 29 hectares all highly productive, or are we talking about pockets?
Well, Ben can correct me if I've got this wrong, but that interim arrangement until we do mapping of highly productive land for Auckland is to refer back to the NZ classification system, and it shows all of the 29 hectares as class 3 and therefore highly productive. The applicant has done some analysis and they have a different view as to whether it's highly productive or not, but technically we're saying that it's caught by the transitional arrangement where we have to rely on that classification system.
So would it be normal through the, if the application was accepted and went through the hearings process, or would it be normal then for the applicant to have to provide evidence as to the actual classification of that soil within that area?
Well, again, the default is that it is classed as highly productive. So detailed soil testing and so on, I don't believe that that's a matter that would necessarily need to progress through expert evidence if it's highly productive under the NPS highly productive land at this point in time, until if and when the government makes changes. It's caught by that. Now, there is an out clause. You can develop highly productive soils under the NPS highly productive land, and there are 3 criteria that you must satisfy, all 3 of them. It's discussed in the report. The 3 criteria relate to demonstrating there's a need for the additional land, demonstrating that there's no alternative location to allow for more growth, and the third one is in relation to the economic benefits of allowing the development outweigh the benefits of retaining the soil. So, but again, that's something that could be tested if accepted and goes through the hearings. Is there a technical knockout, or is there an argument from a policy point of view that there's a pathway forward? The applicant clearly believes that they meet all 3 of those criteria, so that even if it is technically deemed highly productive, they still see themselves as having a pathway to get through all 3 criteria.
I've got a couple of questions. I'm not sure if it's a planning issue, but have you looked at a number of other private plan changes and other developments in Warkworth? It's a classic case of this stuff is way ahead of the market, mate. And in rejecting it, would probably the best thing we could possibly do for the shareholders of Avita, because they're going to lose a stack of cash on this one, mate, if ever I've seen it. So what else is around there? Because I'm aware of a lot, and it's not that much growth in that town.
So in terms of land that's already zoned residential, there is still some potential for development to take place. We have at least 2 plan changes in the northern area of Warkworth, private plan changes that have gone through the process, become operative, and that creates even more land for growth. And there is a 3rd plan change in the south that's in the middle of a hearing waiting for a commissioner decision, So I guess what I'm saying here is that there is quite a bit of potential for growth. Hear your comments, Mayor, that there might not be big demand at the moment, but we certainly have quite a bit of land that's already zoned or potentially about to be zoned to allow for whatever growth there might be. Yep.
So that there is sufficient zoned land there already for what would be a lot of growth. I mean, it's not that much growth going on there. Next thing, the Environment Court. Well, they haven't had a particularly good run for us of late with what happened at Muriwai, where they approved something which turned out to be a disaster for us, and I'm not able to sue the Environment Court judges. I'm very grumpy about that. Why can't we do that? We're not allowed to sue them, apparently, are we? No. All right. Councillor Sayers, who actually lives up there.
Thank you, Chair. Probably about 3 questions. One would be, obviously, the recommendation in the paper that came to us was for accepting, and now we've put forward we're going to reject it. Just curious what's changed between the period of writing the report with a recommendation to move forward and let this go through the process versus today, John. What did you get extra information, or you didn't get extra information?
Some more intelligent people looked at it.
Councillor Sayers, our advice remains, as on the slide here, that the plan change should be accepted. That's the officer's advice. However, we have an alternative recommendation on the table. Yep.
Okay, thank you for that. Obviously your comments about the regional policy statement are important because there's just such high level. Obviously, this will probably go through into Environment Court, I suspect. So, in terms of, I guess, the rub, because around the regional policy statement, I think you're mainly referring to the rural-urban boundary being pushed out a little bit further. Am I correct in saying that normally that would get dealt with through the hearing process? That would be most common to test that regional policy statement, or have I missed the mark there? I'm just a little bit confused around that.
So the rural urban boundary is a mapped line that is in the district plan section of the unitary plan. What's in the regional policy statement are the assessment matters that have to be considered when anyone is looking to move the urban boundaries. So the criteria talk about having a strong, defensible, logical sort of edge. So we do hear the applicant's case, I guess, that they feel that the existing edge isn't as good as the one that's been proposed next to the golf course. However, on a course assessment, we would certainly look to question that one there. There are a number of other criteria in the regional policy statement in relation to shifting the urban boundary where on a course assessment there are potential grounds for a reject. But more broadly in terms of the regional policy statement, it's the criteria around integrating your infrastructure and delivering that and funding that in line with enabling growth through a plan change rezoning that is a ground that we think is open to the council, and certainly if it's accepted, it's one that would really need to be tested in evidence at the hearings. Not sure if that answers your question, but hopefully it does.
Yeah, it does. And I guess the last one's around infrastructure. It is identified as a growth node, and there's, just for example, Watercare is putting in $300 million worth of infrastructure there right as we speak right now. So the question might be around that Matakana Link Road. So what typically happens? So if this went through and a developer did up some of that road, in terms of the RLT, which you referred to, there's no funding to actually do that road. Would that typically force the RLTP to consider that in the next round? So what I'm saying, if somebody goes in and does up part of the road, does that suddenly make it a priority or bring it up a list in terms of requiring public funding to bring the rest of the road up to spec in terms of, I guess, safety and speeds and all those type of things. So I imagine it being an urban design, the speed limit would drop, where that's actually at the moment probably more rural road, with some of it being 80 k's rather than 50.
So, through the Mayor, decisions made under the RMA, changes to the unitary plan, don't require the council to automatically change the long-term plan or at the next review of the LTP or the regional land transport plan accommodate that. They do sit independently. But of course, if development starts proceeding and consents are granted to allow the development, then inevitably over time some pressure may come on if there are issues in terms of traffic safety that emerge. Or if you have an area of land that's, say, for example, if you take the situation here, if on the aerial photograph the sort of northern area was developed and there was good road frontage, I mean, at the moment it's a rural road, so if there was walking, cycling on this portion but a gap, then, issues certainly can arise in terms of, well, how does the community sort of connect on through, and does that raise safety issues, just general amenity issues? So these are some of the uncertainties that the plan change has. There are provisions that talk about doing assessments as to what parts of Matakana Road need to be upgraded and when, but there's certainly uncertainty there. So long and short of it, no, you're not required to fund those changes, but if development, I think as we all know, starts to proceed and issues arise, then pressure will come on Auckland Transport and Council to look to fix things if there are safety issues or lack of walking and cycling in areas that are disconnected from the main urban area.
Okay, thank you, John. Worship, that's all my questions at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Fully, please.
Kia ora, Chair, and thanks, team. My questions are fairly similar, I guess, to Councillor Sayers. I'm trying to understand because, like in your report at paragraph 15, it very clearly lays out that there are grounds for rejection, and you cover those. And then in paragraph 16, you say, however, and then you sort of start to talk about why you are recommending the acceptance. So I just want that to be very clear, if you can make that as clear as possible, why you are recommending. I know it's different to the Chair's Rex, but I want to understand that difference, that we accept it. Kia ora.
So the application material has a lot of expert reports, traffic reports, reports on other infrastructure, reports on the soil. So it's not as though it's completely deficient, bereft of any argument, obviously flawed, there's no case at all. And when you look at the Environment Court decisions that say, keep it at a high level, don't dive into the detail, err on the side of caution, let it go through, it does seem that this is one that would be better to allow it to have that level of detailed investigation. But as we've said, there are a couple of 2 or 3 clear reasons that that could stand up in court if that was the pathway the committee, the governing body, chose to go down. There is a cost associated with a reject if it's appealed to the Environment Court, but ultimately, if it went through to hearing, things may end up in court in any case. Just trying to think of the other key factors that have influenced it. I think that's probably covered off the main reasons there, that it's on balance. It's unclear how the court would assess this one in terms of what a course level of assessment is. Is our course assessment that there are 2 or 3 flaws the right level of assessment, or is the applicant's? Yeah. But the grounds are open for a reject.
Kia ora, thank you. And is your recommendation perhaps influenced by statements we've made as a council, as a governing body, about wanting to support growth and the FDS and things like that?
Absolutely not about any statements about supporting growth. In terms of the future development strategy, that is the council strategy. A lot of time and effort and community engagement and expert input and input from the CCOs went into that, so that is a very important document, the FDS. But when you get into RMA territory and plan changes, it's only one document that we need to consider. But no, our recommendation isn't sort of tainted by, or I don't think you're suggesting tainted by, isn't influenced by we need to allow more growth at pace or anything like that whatsoever. It's certainly not driven by that.
Kia ora. Thanks, Chair.
Through the chair, if I could just wrap that up, excuse me, a little bit as well. We've had these situations before where you've been asked to accept or reject, and most of the time we accept them through. Really, just to wrap it up, there are grounds for rejection, very clear ones in this case. And yes, there's always a risk to go to court, but as John said, this one probably will end up in court at some point anyway. You know, it's just kind of when it happens. What I wanted to ensure in particular was that our advice is clear about our recommendation, but is also clear that there is another avenue should you choose to do so, and that the chair's rec that you've seen, which no doubt will be debated shortly, is an entirely legal option open to you, and you should consider that. Thanks.
We don't really want to be making recommendations because you're scared of going to court, which seems to be the main reason why you're saying you recommend it. And not a very good reason for that. Deputy Mayor Simpson, please.
Thanks, Chair. My question is exactly around that, though, and that is, in the paper, it talks about costs associated with going to the Environment Court if it's accepted, which I note is your recommendation. But what would be the costs if we rejected it? What would we be up for as far as legal costs?
Yeah, Deputy Mayor, it's very hard to put a figure on that. I mean, I think previously our legal team have indicated, you know, actually I'm loath to say a figure. It's tricky, but it's not into the hundreds of thousands, but it's certainly in the tens of thousands.
Okay, thanks, Chair. My second question then is there any way we can accept with conditions highlighting the things that are of concern to us?
So that's probably a key point that I should have made in response to an earlier question. It would certainly make a lot of sense, as per previous private plan changes, if this one was accepted at this stage, that there is a very strong council submission raising the concerns that I've discussed and that Ben in his report has gone through in more detail. So if it was accepted, this one probably more so than some of the others that have come to the Policy and Planning Committee should have a very strong submission on it because it's raising these issues around shifting the urban boundary, because of the issues around the highly productive land NPS as it currently stands. The infrastructure issues have been present in previous private plan changes, so that's not a new one for a council submission, but absolutely it would make sense, if accepted, to have a very strong submission on these matters of concern.
So thank you. And my last question then, so that is that your advice to accept but put in a very strong submission noting concerns?
Well, that will be consistent with what we've advised the committee before, so yeah, that would be a very sensible thing for the council to do, if accepted. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. With regard to the costs, there's no cost until they actually take you to the Environment Court. And if you reject it, it's amazing. They'll be back having a chat, I'd say. So, Councillor Walker, please.
got a few questions. The first one goes to highly productive land, and the context goes like this, and it's somewhat akin to, let's say, Pukekohe. So I would assume in this instance, we've got a combination of not only highly productive land, as we have at Pukekohe, not to that extent, but nevertheless, access to water and close to transport routes. Would that be the case?
Councillor Walker, could you just clarify, are you...
So I'm just wanting to establish that this is not only highly productive land, but it is highly productive land, it has access to water, and it has very close access to transport routes, which is a similar situation to what you've got in Pukekohe. Though at Pukekohe you've also got frost-free. I don't know whether this is frost-free in this location. That would be a further question I'd ask. And the reason I'm asking this is, yes, you can have highly productive land, but as I've asked in respect of the context around Pukekohe, if you've got a combination of factors, highly productive, frost-free, close to transport, access to water, then it's even more significant. So I just want to establish that.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the red outlined area is the entire 140 hectares of the plan change. The issue around highly productive land is only relevant to the northern 29 hectares. The bit inside of that, the council has already decided through the future development strategy, the Auckland plan before that, and the unitary plan, that that land, the majority of the site in red, is future urban for housing and other urban development, not highly productive land. But yes, absolutely, the northern 29 hectares, classed at the moment as highly productive land under the transitional mapping for the NPS highly productive land, does have good access to transport with the Matakana Link Road connecting into the State Highway 1 extension up to Warkworth, great transport access, good water, but just to be clear, it's just the northern 29 hectares. I'm not sure about the frost-free, but yeah. Essentially agreeing with you there in terms of the northern 29 hectares.
And it's
relevant
correct to
that,
say,
not the rest of the site.
It's also correct to say that the land in question that's productive is also currently productive. It's a working farm.
That's correct. I don't believe there's any horticulture there, but it is a pasture farm, yep, or number of potential owners in that northern area. Is it just one site or more than one?
Two sites.
Two sites in the northern area. Yep.
The other question I've got is just around stormwater and geology. The report mentions them, but really doesn't go into any detail. Are there any flooding effects within this catchment? Bearing in mind that you've got streams that run through it, and they run into, I'm assuming, the Maharangi.
Yeah, so most of the flooding is contained in those gullies and stuff. It's sort of rolling pasture, so there isn't floodplains extending over the land of any great area. Yeah.
What about the geology? Is there any northern allochthon within this area? That's the most unstable landform that we've got in the region, and it's been responsible for a significant number of slips and slides and conundrums that the council finds itself in.
Yeah. A geological report was provided as part of the application. I don't know off the top of my head the soil type, unfortunately.
And the last question just goes to the point that you raise about erring on the side of caution. In a situation where the report quite clearly indicates that we have significant infrastructure issues, ample area outside of the site for development, and quite clearly we don't have the money and don't have the money into the future, are we not going to be erring on the side of caution by turning this down at this point? And in the wider context, is it not important for us to do that so we send a signal to the market? Otherwise, we get into the situation, and councillors, we have been advised on this by council officers before, we send a signal to the market that it's open slather. you may have a marginal proposition, but whack in a private plan change and see how you get on. And quite clearly, that's not sending, I would have thought, the right signal to the market. So have we changed from that earlier position that in previous councils I've certainly been party to? I could probably even refer you to agenda items if it comes to it.
I suppose there is a question in there. Councillor Walker, so the phrase err on the side of caution is from that case law which leads to and therefore accept. But I take your point that the governing body in erring on the side of caution may look to effectively cut this off at the pass. These matters that we've discussed as being problematic with the plan change, if they stack up with good evidence in a hearing, then the plan change would be stopped at that point. And if commissioners disagreed with that conclusion, as we've done in the past, there is an avenue at that point for the council to appeal its independent commission decision after a hearing. So I guess what I'm saying is that, there's still a strong, in accepting at this point, you are absolutely not supporting the merit of the plan change. That would still be tested, and as I've talked about before, a submission with council staff and experts turning up at the hearing is the avenue that you could progress these concerns.
So the last question I've got goes to, this is a stage process. So the first stage is around accepting the private plan change or not. Obviously, any applicant has the opportunity to appeal that, and then if that appeal is successful, you then go to the next stage, which is around dealing with the plan change. In a situation where we would determine to send a strong signal at this point and turn this down, even if there's a hearing or the like, I think it would be fair for me to say that much of the evidence around that first stage would carry over to the second stage in terms of work that council officers and others would be having to do. So we have to spend some money around this regardless. So going back to my related point around erring on the side of caution, if we want to stand by the unitary plan that we spent a bundle of money on, and Megan Tyler could probably tell us that, should we not err on the side of caution at this point, send a signal, turn this down? That doesn't stop an applicant appealing. We're going to have to spend some money anyway, irrespective of whether it advances or not. It may well be, and we can't second guess, as the Mayor has said, that the applicant may determine at this point in time to exercise some prudence and not advance their prospect at this point. And I'm sure there'll be many developers at this point weighing these sorts of matters up, because we have falling migration into New Zealand and a number of other factors that may count against some form of development. These are all things that exist in the cold light of day. So coming back to my question around exercising the defence of our unitary plan, the points that I'm making around funding, we'd have to spend it anyway. Are they not factors we should be taking into account?
Mayor, are we in questions, or does the motion need to be moved and seconded?
That was a question.
Well, I think he did ask some questions.
I asked a question
have
and I
we
phrased it with a
changed
question at
our
the end.
approach from supporting our plan to being worried about legal action? I think that was a question he asked, and so I'm waiting for an answer.
In response to your question, Councillor Walker, by making a submission raising these issues and seeking effectively that the plan changes declined or significantly amended, you would be supporting the council's strategies and plans, but the option to reject is open to you.
Right, councillor Watson?
Just a quick question, just to help my understanding of the kind of phasing and everything that's gone on in this area here. I mean, just to the north of this site, northwest maybe, you've got all this development that's occurring around Claydon Road and Matakana Link Road, which is it is to the northwest, isn't it? Yeah. So just a question: how does that notion of sequencing coming in when when that site is actually further north than this site, further along Matakana Road, albeit it's got that Matakana Link Road now, which is a big new road that's opened up.
Mm. So Councillor Walker's referring to, there is quite a bit of development happening in this area here through recent private plan changes, well over the last 5 years have rezoned quite a bit of land here. So this is an old aerial photograph, getting a bit out of date.
Yeah,
so there is the new road extension of State Highway 1, and then there's the Matakana Link Road roughly through here, somewhere at the back of the sports fields, cutting on through, and then there's housing around that, and on the other side of State Highway 1 on the western side. So yeah, there's a lot of development there. I'm not sure quite how relevant that is to our decision to accept, adopt or reject. The fact that there's development happening there, it could potentially happen in the location of the private plan change as well, if there was adequate infrastructure and certainty around the funding and delivery of that infrastructure. You could potentially have development happening on a number of fronts, but it is very much contingent on the appropriate infrastructure being in place. Yeah. Which, as we've said in the report, there is a lack of certainty around certainly the funding for it and the provisions to support it in the plan. We also see some issues with those.
Okay, yeah, I just, that's just a practical kind of observation. So really, what I'm taking out of this is finally balanced. The Mayor's put up, quite reasonably his view, which was sort of alluded to a little bit in the, the qualifiers you had in your report, but either way, it doesn't seem to be a risk in this, so it is finely balanced, and it will really be up to the applicant then what happens thereafter if we choose to be a little bit more definitive or cautious, I guess, is a choice, isn't it?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, the risk is that the applicant appeals to the Environment Court, and there are costs associated with that. We've talked about that already, and it is an if, of course, as the Mayor has mentioned. And there is, as there always is with Environment Court or court proceedings, some risk of costs being awarded against the council. I can't give the legal advice on that, and it wouldn't be appropriate in this forum, but yeah, there's always risk of the cost of running the case, and then if you lose the case, Environment Court can award costs against an appellant or the council in any case. So yeah, I mean, there are risks, but those are the only ones that spring to mind.
Councillor Hills, please.
Thanks, Mayor. And yeah, just for the context, obviously spoke to the Mayor about this, and he had some very big concerns, and I share those concerns. So the resolutions to reject, moved by me or the Mayor, doesn't matter, and seconded. And then basically, in this case, it's because there are grounds to reject. So maybe a question for Megan. I know that there is often a hesitancy, which is good, to do this largely from our experience for the Orake reject, but could you just confirm the difference between the Orake reject is in that paper that day, there was no grounds to reject, but it was rejected?
Thanks through the chair, that's right. So we're really clear that there are some grounds to reject if that's what you wish to do, and that wasn't the case in Orake.
And there are other times where people would like us to reject, and I pushed to accept because there were no grounds to reject.
Yes, that's right.
Right, so, and the other question I have, just on so I know it's perfectly normal to be able to do this, but it's quite unusual for an applicant to apply for private plan change that covers, like 2/3 of this isn't their land, or is that quite a normal process? This is, I think there's 48 owners of the 140 hectares.
It is quite normal. If you think about the cluster of plan changes in the Drury area, we had 5, 3 on the east, 2 on the west. They, in many cases, there were multiple owners besides the applicant.
And the discussions around the expectations of the infrastructure and the roads and connections coming through, if they don't pay for upgrades on Matakana Road, how can that, what tools could we be certain of if you've got a whole lot of other owners in that lower section? Like, what guarantees could we have that the access actually can come through all those? Or do we just end up with the development right at the top of the...
So as well as the plan change talking about certain upgrades that would be required to Matakana Road, there is a requirement to provide a walking cycling access. I'm not sure exactly where. Unfortunately, we don't have the diagram from the plan change, but there is a proposal through the site to connect walking and cycling. But as you've mentioned, that involves multiple parties, not just the applicant. So there is uncertainty as to how quickly that connection could be created. So it's one that there is quite a lot of community interest in forming that connection. There is a community group involved in it. Ben, if you can remind me the name of the connection there. Matakana something walkway, perhaps? No?
Trail.
Apologies, but anyway, there is a proposal to connect through there, but there is uncertainty around exactly how that will be funded or delivered. So that's another question mark around the plan change at this stage.
And the other question for John or Megan, just when we talk about, we do have a budget, not for quantums, but we do set aside budget for, this is not going to be unbudgeted spend, whatever happens going forth. This is, we set aside in the long-term plan the legal advice and, you know, the budgets for that.
Yes, we absolutely do. So sometimes we don't know when that money will need to be spent, depending on the situation. But yes, we do have legal budget and budgets for these kinds of processes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Baker, please.
Sorry, second one round. So just looking at paragraph 7C, do we have the ability to reject the plan change in relation to the 29 hectares and the request to move the rural-urban boundary whilst accepting the rest with the direction from the governing body to make a strong submission in regards to the infrastructure and the triggers for timing? And would that be a more pragmatic option?
So that is an option you don't have to accept in its entirety or reject in the entirety. The clause that you referred to right up there in the front, exec summary, the RMA does allow you to accept in part or reject in part. So that is an option. It's not one that we've looked at in too much detail, but it is one that is also available as an accept in part and reject north of the urban boundary, coupled with a submission on the
Councillor Lee, please.
So the proposal here is for a mixed housing zone. Is that correct?
Predominantly mixed housing urban, which is 3-storey medium density zoning.
The company Advita, they specialise in retirement villages and care for the aged, that sort of stuff, do they not?
That's correct, and that zoning provides for retirement villages, as well as general housing.
Okay. Up front are the good things about the development that sound good, pretty good. Walking and cycling trails, etc., etc. But down in section 15, get down to the infrastructure, the carrying capacity, if you will, which is a key to resource management and Part 2 of the RMA. So it looks like Auckland Transport, so that's accessibility and transport, Council Healthy Waters Department and Water Care have their doubts about this, and that there are grounds for rejection available to the council on the grounds of contrary to sound resource management practice. It's one of the reasons to reject, and also could make the Auckland Unitary Plan inconsistent. So you acknowledge that what's in section 15 is quite correct.
Well, Councillor Lee, that is correct, and that's why it's finely balanced, and we've said that there are grounds within those broad categories of sound resource management practice, contrary to Part 5 of the RMA, that would be grounds for reject. And for the reasons that we've traversed on balance, those matters can be tested further through the hearings process, but there are grounds available for a reject.
There could be cases where it could be argued that to reject on the grounds that it's not suitable could be seen as arbitrary. But if it's based on the statutory reasons for rejection, then it seems to me that someone deciding to reject would be within the bounds of the law and acting reasonably. So if it came to the cost, which we always hear when there's an argument, really, to be honest, are unlikely to be punitive, given that if there was a rejection, it would be based on the Act, the requirements of the Act. Would that be right?
That's absolutely right. You mentioned the word reasonableness, Councillor Lee. You know, that makes me think about matters such as judicial review. The report clearly identifies grounds, and therefore you would be within the scope of a reasonable decision to do that. It's not our advice, not our recommendation for some of the reasons that I've mentioned around the way the Environment Court assesses things at a high level if you reject them at this first phase. However, short answer, yes, within the law and reasonable in that sense of the term.
In the past, we've had cases where the council being permissive in its attitude to these things, we have ended up with subdivisions without proper sewage treatment, which obviously is not in accord with Part 2 of the Act, but actually offends fundamental sanitation requirements of any civilization, RMA or no RMA. Is there a danger, given the reservations expressed by particularly Water Care and Healthy Waters, that there is a danger of this happening yet again, and with the consequent problems and bad publicity?
Yeah, and Water Care and AT have flagged up some concerns, although, as I mentioned, Water Care are actively providing additional capacity, so those issues will be largely resolved in terms of the water, but certainly from a transport point of view, we do see some issues there. I guess the applicant states in its material that that those matters can be assessed at the hearing stage and then subsequently at the resource consent stage, and if there isn't the adequate infrastructure, then things could be declined at those subsequent stages. But this is the very first step in the process, and as we mentioned, there are some matters there that are of concern and do give grounds for a potential to reject.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Simpson and then Councillors Bartley and Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. My question may be to Greg, noting that this is area. Greg, you know, obviously there's in a local area, I know that the local board view isn't sought in this case as per 108, 109, but often people know what plans are in a local area. Have you got any awareness of what the local board thinks about this?
No,
Councillor
there's
Sayers?
probably, because I haven't spoken to them specifically on it, there is a local nearby private plan change that's been approved where they are trucking out the sewage at the moment. And Council kind of Watson asked a question about how does one affect the other. So, you know, it's quite important that we get these things right, that we don't end up in a situation where we thought we weren't going to be trucking out sewage and, you know, we end up trucking it out. But regard to the local board's opinion, Desley, no, I'm afraid I can't comment on that.
Okay, thanks, Greg.
Councillor Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to ask a question. Maybe it was around process, but given the sounds like a high likelihood of court action, do we think we should have held this item in confidential and excluded the public, given some of us may feel restricted in what we're saying because we don't want it to be brought up in a court case later?
Well, it's a good question, but it's ended up here. I don't know quite why the timing ended up. It didn't get to policy and planning, which is where it should be. But
I'm happy to take that. We want to avoid hearing matters in confidential as much as possible. We think that it is clearly legally open to you to do that, that there are grounds to reject. We don't think there's any question of being able to say that out loud or that there's any question about that aspect. If, however, you did want to dig into particular details, that does start getting a little bit difficult, I agree with you. But we thought that this is typically considered an open rather than confidential, and so we took that principle of being an open because we didn't think there was anything in particular that we couldn't talk about in open. If it does get to that point, of course, you know that we will say, look, it is inappropriate, or we could even go into confidential if there was something in particular that the chair agreed really does need to be considered.
good question. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, team, for bringing this and your recommendations today, the additional recommendations I'm referring to. Can I just clarify, so just on the transport front, and I think that's covered in attachment B, isn't it? The notice of requirements, they've been progressed now past appeal and they're now designations, but for each of those there is no capital funding allocated through the RLTP. Is that a brief summary?
I believe there are still appeals. In fact, I think perhaps the applicant has appealed one of the designations through the land. So the main ones of relevance to the site here are Matakana Road itself has a designation, and Snell's Beach Road has a designation as well. But they are largely through and to the point of being a designation as opposed to a notice of requirement. So they've gone through the process. There are some matters under appeal, but there is no funding for Matakana Road or Snell's Beach Road designations.
Okay, you've got those. I have a hunch that they might be designations now. I think they might have gone through the NORs, but look, that's detail. And then in addition to those, we've got no funding for Hill Street intersection, no funding for the Northern PT interchange, and I know that's to the west of the site, but it supports the greater area, and that's a big one. Sanspit Link Road, you mentioned Manukata Road, and then we go to the water care response at paragraphs in attachment B, paragraphs, let me find it, excuse me. when you read the water care response, it's sort of largely on the horizon, you know, the infrastructure spend. But then you get to one in particular, the Warkworth water supply capacity upgrade. And they've said this is due for completion in 2043 to 2053. And they lead into identifying that by saying that will be required, not maybe required, it will be required. I just want to get that confirmed, that it is an absolute requirement. It's not a wriggle room project, it is an absolute requirement. It's paragraph 23 of attachment B, last bullet point. The project being Warkworth water supply capacity upgrade.
Yeah, Councillor Darby, I think the key point there is for the full build-out. Yeah. So with these matters, there's often a pragmatic and very common approach of allowing certain development to proceed and then the infrastructure to sort of catch up over time. But certainly for the full build-out, that is correct. That's the advice from Water Care that particular water supply project would be required for the full build-out. But we've also been advised that a certain amount of development can proceed ahead of that, a fairly significant proportion. But where things get to with Water Care and Auckland Transport is there are engineering reports from the applicant. Water Care and Auckland Transport often see this as getting down into detailed merits assessment. So they take the approach of saying, okay, there are some capacity issues, but they're not fundamental showstoppers for the entire development, and they seek to either come in through a submission themselves or be part of the council team in the hearings and explore those issues in more detail.
But does that Water Care response, does that take into account capacity being taken up in other parts of Warkworth? There's zoned land, there's been plan changes and private plan changes, numerous. Does their response anticipate full build out in the other areas plus the full build out here? How are they arriving at that?
That's my understanding of the way that they model things. They look to ensure that the existing urban, residential or commercial zoned land is accommodated, and then they do the assessment of, well, over and above that, what capacity is there within the future urban areas. So they do look at ensuring that it's not taking away from existing live zoned residential land or commercial land to then create problems down the line for existing areas that have already gone through a planning process and have that zoning. So they do look at that issue. Yep.
Well, that's all the questions I've got, but we'll go to comments now and I'll kick it away. So if you'd like to withdraw. I'm looking at this map in front of us now, and this is an enormous... No, don't go off that bloody map, please. Who touched that? Right. This is obviously must be a big farm that someone's bought, but if you look at it, it's about 15% of the entire area which is zoned within the urban-rural boundary, which is a hell of a lot of rural land in it already. It's about the equivalent of the town part that took 150 years to be built. So there'd be very few, if any, people in this room who'll be alive by the time this is covered in houses. I can tell you that now. This is not that high a growth town. And so if this was Auckland, we would be looking at a private plan change for something bigger than Howick and Manukau. And would you feel good about that? The sheer scale of it is ridiculous. If they want to build an elderly care facility, why don't they just make an application for an elderly care facility? Because what I've got a sneaky suspicion here is you're going to have an elderly care facility and flog a whole lot of land which has been upgraded on a speculation thing here, which is not benefiting anybody up there or anyone anywhere. And so this is not a large, when we had that one out at Beachlands, there was a significant area set aside for commercial, for jobs and and whatnot. There's none of that in here, none of that for education, none of that for health, other than kind of old people being slightly killed off. But the sheer size of this. Oh, they have, right to die. So the scale of it. If we, for instance, were able to, I don't know, because the planning is not an accurate science, it's a matter of opinion. And if we were to say, righto, you had this here, and in what you haven't done in 5 years' time, you've got to give back to us at that price. I'll bet they're not interested in that. So this is not about town planning, this is about speculation. And it's not good for that whole area. And so I can think of 1,000 reasons why we shouldn't do this. Probably only about 5 of those fit inside the RMA, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't have good reasons to reject things. So I'm firmly in the reject this proposal and welcome them to come back with something or other. It's just about what they do for a living, which is elderly care facilities. And I've got... Well, Councillor Hills, just confirm you're going to move this, and that I'm happy to second it. So it's moved and seconded. I've got Councillor Baker wants to have a chat about this, and Councillor Hills to follow, and anybody else, and we'll.
I do want to have a chat. Look, and just if your recommendations fail, Mayor, I've got some alternatives to put up as an amendment if it does fail. But we've got to go through their amendments first, but that doesn't matter. Just I can see where you're coming from and where the desire to reject this is, and so I actually don't think it is the right way of going about it. And I accept and acknowledge the advice from staff who are sort of caught in between here. They're sort of telling us, yes, there are grounds to reject, but there's also grounds to accept. And so where do I see our best opportunity lies? I think it lies with us accepting it, but rejecting in part, rejecting completely the 29 hectares that sits outside the rural urban zone. And so I take up the comments from Wayne earlier on about supporting and acknowledging the work that went into the unitary plan. The unitary plan created a future urban zone that is there to enable development. This is one of them. They're looking to develop on a future urban zone that we as a council have created. And so I believe that we should be allowing that, accepting that, letting it go through, but we should also be directing staff to put in a very strong submission in regards to infrastructure and the timing of it. And so we shouldn't allow the expansion of the rural urban boundary. That went through a massive, massive process through the unitary plan, and it should be stuck and fixed in stone unless there's really, really good reasons not to move it or not to keep it. I don't believe these exist. It's a different piece of land. It's owned by it appears to be owned by a different crowd. So I think this will go through, but I've also believe that I could actually, you're right, I could move an amendment that we reject in part, and I think there was someone working on that potentially. Have you got that?
Sorry, we're just working on it, yeah.
Right.
But we are working on it if it comes to that.
Right, we're in debate of this at the moment.
No, that's good.
But I hear what you're saying, and the bit was 2035, and just for those who haven't checked their watch, it's 2025. So I've got Councillor Hills, Councillor Fully, Councillor Dalton, Councillor Henderson, then afternoon.
Thank you. And I think this is not something we do all the time. This will be the second, if it goes through, reject this term, and we've obviously had the Beachlands situation, which the only time we went into private was when we were mediating and putting our kind of defence together, and we got some really good outcomes through that. The issue is that, you know, our communities are struggling all over the city with infrastructure and with the price of infrastructure and the fact there is no funding for the infrastructure. And unfortunately for Councillor Sayers in the Rodney area, the funding for Hill Street is gone. You know, that was in the budget, now it's gone. There will not be confirmed budgets for these roads, and this is significant. I do understand Councillor Baker's point, and it's a good one, but the land that the applicants own, I think, is 29 over there, but it's 55 in total hectares, so I imagine they still want the whole plan change, but we don't know that yet. But the issue is this: we do have grounds here. One, that it's far earlier, and the whole point of doing the future development strategy was to try and point out to developers, to the community, that we barely have the funding for the infrastructure in urban areas. Now we're getting consents declined all over our urban area because of lack of infrastructure right now. And so if we push this forward without considering that it is more than 10 years ahead of time, and the 29 hectares outside the rural urban boundary, and the fact we don't know how it'll connect down to the town, which is already under strain, I have concerns about. So it's really just the points there. The highly productive land is also important. If we just turn our blind eye to that and say, yes, you can build on this rural zoned land, that's a massive concern too. So I think it's important to move forward at this point to reject. I hope that it comes back, we can come around the table and come to a good agreement for coming and bringing it back to accept at a future time. But at this stage, those issues are present and they're clear as an option to us. And I don't think we should be afraid to put this option forward. And yeah, the Mayor's been pretty clear, and he was pretty clear yesterday that he supports that direction too.
Councillor Fully, please.
Kia ora, thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, it's obvious that there are grounds for rejection, and I do want to thank our staff for the hard work that they've put in. But I'm looking at this from a process point of view in a similar way to Councillor Baker, where I do think that we should be consistent in the way that we approach these, and I do think that we put ourselves at risk, and I heard that coming through from our staff, which is why I was listening very carefully to what they were saying, because we do put ourselves at risk. Yes, this probably will end up in court, but by not following a consistent process and a proper process, we may put ourselves at risk for other grounds for appeal as well around the procedure that we're following. When I'm looking at paragraphs 15, 16 and 17 in the report, it's clear that our staff have looked at all of the arguments, all of the issues, they've looked at the relevant law, the evidence from the applicant, as well as what Auckland Transport Watercare have had to say, and they absolutely accept that there are those grounds for rejection. But then in paragraph 16, they say that on balance, they recommend the best way forward is to follow that process, is to accept it, and then for us to make a strong submission through the hearings and decision-making process. And that's the part that I'm sort of, sitting here thinking about. And so I'm just putting that out there that although I accept and I acknowledge that there are strong grounds to reject, I also accept and acknowledge the recommendation that we heard very clearly from our staff here. And I'm probably going to back that. And at this stage, Chair, I would like to say that I'll call for a division as well when we get to the vote as well. Kia ora. Thank you.
Councillor Dalton, please.
Thank you. I guess if I wanted to talk to consistency, which has been accepting plan changes and then putting in a strong submission, but consistently that has been within an area in which we can have those negotiations. We feel that we can come to the table on them and reach some outcomes. Beachlands would be one. Consistently, we rejected Riverhead because there were good reasons, and they're not unlike this one as well. This would be consistent a long way away out of Yeah. Oh, I'll double check it. I guess it's not just the infrastructure that we would have to come to the table and provide, and we're absolutely stretched as it is, let alone going out, bringing something in 10 years ahead of time. Also the surrounding infrastructure that we don't provide, that other partners do provide, and I think of a retirement village out there on its own without anything else around it for the people that are living there, in terms of perhaps a hospital that can serve a population growth. So look, I'm going to go with supporting the rejection in this place. I think it's consistent with what we have done previously. It is not like other submissions that we have had closer to the urban area where we can come to the table and discuss the requirements for infrastructure that we provide. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson, please.
Hey, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Look, I'm really excited actually to be speaking in support of your view here, Mr. Mayor. I think we need to be sending a message to the development community and the Auckland community that we simply cannot afford sprawl. It frustrates me, these conversations, because, you know, why do we bother with things like the future development strategy if it's going to be routinely ignored whenever it's convenient for people to make profits? You know, in mid-November, Watercare released a really fantastic map which showed where there were constraints in their network, be they water or wastewater or both. Warkworth, I just pulled it up, was an area in bright orange as having a wastewater constraint. And incidentally, the central suburbs of Auckland are calming, beautiful, green, where there's plenty of capacity. What I'd suggest to my colleagues is to find that map, print it out, put it on the wall of the office, and whenever you're thinking about planning decisions, have a look at that map. Have a look at where we can build and where maybe we should be looking at thinking twice on it. And Watercare in that map is Watercare Warkworth is a place where we should be thinking twice. And, you know, not to belabor the point, but we do these plans for a reason. Watercare released these maps for a reason. That we want to encourage smart planning, compact cities, where, you know, we're encouraging growth where there is jobs, where there are places to study, where there is already rapid transit provided. And unfortunately, this isn't an area where we should be sprawling to. We can't afford it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Darb.
Yes, I'm supporting these motions, though I probably could quibble over the A4, the word uncertainty. There is actually no certainty at all. There is no funding in the transport area. And wearing the AT hat, I can tell you that it is very unlikely that we'll be finding it anywhere in the near, medium future for that area. And if we do, we'll probably be reallocating it from Manukau, Mandarewa, Auckland East, West, and it'll head up there. And that's gone on for too long. We've done that for not just this council, but previously. And we've bought into this idea, this being seduced into the shared funding. And next thing, we're coughing up big time. And I know some would probably love, you know, the Matakana Link Road off the back of the Puhoi Warkworth project, but the Matakana Link Road was a classic example of a big mega spend that the development community should have been paying significantly more for, but we, the public money, just poured in there because it was a good thing to do at the same time as the Puhoi to Warkworth. But that has induced even more spend. So just on the transport area, we do not have any funding. It's not an uncertainty of funding for the transport spend. There is no funding. I won't ask for any changes in the words though, Mayor. I think we all know what we mean there. But the NORs that are now designations have no funding. And then there's a list of projects that I went through before. Others have mentioned Hill Street intersection. But really important things like the Northern PT interchange, We've got an interim project there. It's built and it's being used, but it's got very limited capacity. Look, I think this is a good process. This is the gateway process under the Act, and it's a course assessment. And we're even at the course assessment stage, we're seeing very large red flags. We have to act now. We cannot be waiting to, engage in the RMA process later on as it goes to the next, if it went to the next stage. Now's the time for us to act. And in terms of risk, I think if somebody around this table is concerned about legal risk and cost, the real cost and the real risk is embarking on letting this through, waving it through now, and dealing with the infrastructure deficit, which is probably in the hundreds of millions of dollars that we will be facing.
That was a good finishing speech. Well, I'm going to now put the vote.
Division's been called.
Somebody call for a division?
Yes, councillor Foley.
The great council division call. Off we go, please. I won't arrange this. This is done by one of the excellent ladies to my right.
Councillor Baker.
No.
Councillor Bartley.
For.
Councillor Dalton.
For.
Councillor Darby.
4.
Councillor Ferry.
For.
Councillor Filipina.
Mike's not.
Councillor Filipina.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the volume. Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Councillor Foley.
Against?
Councillor Henderson.
Yes.
Councillor Hills.
In favour.
Councillor Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Leone.
For.
Councillor Newman.
Yep.
Councillor Sayers.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Simpson.
I'll abstain, thank you.
Councillor Stewart. Councillor Turner.
For.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
For.
Mayor Brown.
For.
So that's carried 16 votes to 17 votes to 3 with 1 abstention.
Righto. 12, property